The night I walked into the Alpha King's wolf, I didn't find the monster everyone warned me about. I found a door. Heavy oak, reinforced with iron bands, standing 3 inches ajar in the middle of an infinite darkness. The exact gap that had started everything between us, replicated inside the beast like a memory the wolf couldn't let go of. And behind that door, sitting at a table in a room full of sunlight, a man was waiting. But I need to tell you about the morning first, about the breakfast, and the vow made of bread rolls, and the woman who showed up with extra socks because she refused to let her best friend walk into a wolf without proper footwear. Because this is the end of our story, and endings, like beginnings, deserve to be told right. I woke to an empty bed. Not the panicked emptiness of the morning after the confession, the cold sheets, the desperate note, the world tilting. This was different. The sheets were warm. His scent, pine and iron, and the underneath thing my wolf recognized as correct, hung in the air. And on his pillow, weighted by the small iron wolf figurine that had become his preferred communication anchor, was a note. The handwriting had improved. Not dramatically. His letters still leaned at angles that suggested an ongoing negotiation between intent and motor control, but the words came easier now, longer, more certain. Went to prepare the chamber. Soren needs the space arranged. Eat breakfast. The honeycomb is from the south kitchen. Tessa threatened someone. I didn't ask who. I'll be ready when you are. Then, pressed harder at the bottom, come back. 2 words. Not come back from the wolf or come back from the trial, just come back. An instruction so simple it could mean anything. A request so vast it meant everything. I held the note against my chest and allowed myself exactly 30 seconds of terror before the coping mechanisms kicked in, and I got out of bed to face the last impossible door. Tessa arrived 12 minutes later with a pack, a dress, and the expression of a woman who had been awake since 3 in the morning preparing for this and would accept neither gratitude nor argument. "Don't say anything," she said, laying the dress across the bed. "Danya found it in the formal stores. It's not gray. I repeat, it is not gray. You're not wearing servants' colors to your own bonding trial. I don't care if it violates your personal brand of aggressive humility." The dress was deep blue, simple, well made. The kind of garment that respected the wearer by not trying to be more important than she was. "It's beautiful," I said. "It's adequate. You're the one who's beautiful. I'm just managing the logistics." She began braiding my hair with the efficient dexterity of a woman who'd spent years working with fabric and thread and applied the same precision to friendship. "Tessa, don't. If you say something emotional right now, I'll cry, and I specifically budgeted my crying for after the ceremony. I have a schedule." "Respect the schedule." "I was just going to ask if you brought the socks." She stopped braiding. Looked at me in the mirror. Her eyes were bright, her jaw tight, the effort of composure visible in every line of her face. "Of course I brought the socks," she whispered. "I've brought socks to every important event since this whole thing started. It's practically a professional qualification at this point." She resumed braiding. Her fingers trembled against my scalp. "You walked into a monster's room on your first day because the door was open 3 inches," she said quietly. "You've been walking through impossible doors ever since. This one's just bigger, and if I don't come through it, then I'll come in after you. And I'll bring the socks, because that's what I do, Brielle. That's what I've always done." She tied off the braid, straightened the dress, stepped back and looked at me with an expression that contained 3 years of friendship and 4 weeks of the most intense shared experience 2 people could survive. "You look like a Luna," she said. "I look like a maid in a nice dress. Same thing. Turns out, I hugged her." She hugged back so hard I heard my ribs creak and her hands shook against my shoulders. Neither of us acknowledged the shaking. Some things are too important to name. The bonding chamber sat in the lower levels of the citadel, a circular stone room older than the fortress itself, carved from bedrock, lit by torches that cast wolf-shaped shadows along the curved walls. Elder Soren had arranged the space with the meticulous care of a man who'd performed this ceremony for generations and understood that ritual exists to hold weight that ordinary rooms cannot. The witnesses had gathered. Rurik stood at the eastern wall, scarred, massive, positioned where he'd stood for 6 years, guarding his alpha, always guarding. Tynan occupied the opposite wall, hands behind his back, military posture, the cousin who challenged and yielded and earned trust that challenge alone could never provide. He caught my eye as I entered and gave a single nod, not warm, not cold, respectful, the acknowledgement of a wolf who'd witnessed what I could do and revised his assessment permanently. Margaret had her equipment arranged on a stone shelf, monitors, instruments, the clinical apparatus of a healer who knew that what was about to happen had no medical precedent and was determined to document it regardless. Her expression carried the specific tension of a scientist standing at the edge of unexplored territory with inadequate maps and excessive curiosity. My father stood near the doorway. He'd arrived from Dunhallow 2 days ago and spent most of his time in the cradle room, sitting beside the cradle the old king had built, touching the wood, processing 23 years of secrets his dead wife had carried. He looked at me now with an expression I couldn't fully read: pride, fear, guilt, love. The entire complicated arithmetic of a father watching his daughter do something extraordinary that he'd almost prevented by selling her for a border tax. And then there was Dagna. She appeared in the doorway behind my father, head of domestic staff, built like a siege weapon, temperament to match. She'd overseen my arrival, assigned me to floor detail, warned me to stay out of the West Wing, watched me ignore every instruction she'd given with a consistency that probably should have gotten me flogged. She looked at me, standing in the bonding chamber in blue, about to walk into the Alpha King's wolf. "I told you to stay out of the West Wing," she said. A pause, the torchlight flickering against stone. "I'm glad you didn't listen." 2 lines. She nodded once, stepped back, and didn't speak again. But those 2 lines carried the entire weight of a woman who'd spent her life enforcing rules, acknowledging that the most important things happen when someone brave enough breaks them. Kalen was in the center of the room. He'd been there when I entered, but I'd saved him for last because looking at him required my full attention and a functioning cardiovascular system, and I wasn't confident about the latter. He was dressed simply, dark linen, no military attire, no formal regalia, just a man in a room, waiting, his hands at his sides, his eyes, amber with gold at the edges, that permanent balance, fixed on me with the complete attention I'd come to understand as his way of listening with his entire body. I crossed the room, stood in front of him, close enough to feel his warmth radiating through the space between us, close enough to smell pine and iron, close enough to see the fine tremor in his hands and the effort it took to keep them still. "Hi," I said, the corner of his mouth lifted. "Hi. You look terrified. You look terrified. You look beautiful." I look like a maid in a borrowed dress. "You look like the answer." He paused. The words were still expensive. He spent them anyway. To every question, I stopped asking. When the wolf took over, I took his hands, both of them, felt the tremor transfer to my own fingers, felt the bond between us humming, the thread that connected his heartbeat to mine, the thread I was about to follow into the deepest part of him. "Before I go in," I said, "I need you to know something. Burlell, let me say this, because the words might be harder to find on the other side, and I want them to exist in the air between us before I walk through that door." He waited. The room waited. Even the torch flames seemed to hold. "You are not the wolf," I said. "You are not the crown. You are not the dominance pressure or the isolation or the 11 months of darkness. You are the man who left me wool socks because my boots had holes. You are the man who repaired a table with a bent candelabra because it was the only tool available and the only gesture your hands could make. You are the man who found a wild flower growing through stone and brought it to a maid because you wanted her to have something beautiful." My voice cracked. I let it. "That's who I'm looking for in there, not the Alpha King, not the beast. The man who sat on the stone floor behind a door open 3 inches and waited for someone to come back." His grip on my hands tightened. His eyes were luminous, the amber bright, the gold retreating, the man as far forward as I'd ever seen him. I need to tell you something, too, he said. Okay. He drew a breath, held it, and spoke, not fragments, not the rationed, costly syllables I'd grown accustomed to, full sentences. Still rough, still deliberate, each word placed with the care of someone building a bridge that absolutely had to hold, but more of them than I'd ever heard at once. The longest sustained speech of his recovery, every syllable costing him and every syllable paid willingly, because this was the moment that justified the expense. The night you walked through my door, I was already gone. The man was buried. The wolf was all that was left, and you sat on my floor and talked about furniture and brought me bread from your own plate. He paused, breathed, found the next piece, and I thought, the wolf thought, this creature is not afraid. Why is this creature not afraid? My hands were shaking in his were shaking in mine. We held each other steady, and then you came back. The next day, and the next. His voice roughened, not from the wolf, but from the effort of carrying something too large for a throat still healing. And every day you came back was a day the man got closer to the surface. Because you were standing on the other side of a gap that was exactly big enough for hope to fit through. Tears. Mine. His. Both. You didn't save me with your blood, Brielle. You saved me with bread rolls and stubbornness and a refusal to stop showing up. He lifted our joined hands, pressed them together between us, her heart and his, the same distance as the gap closing. So when you go into the wolf today, and you find the darkness and the rage, and 11 months of being buried alive, I need you to know what's underneath all of it. What? Me. Just me, waiting by a door. His voice dropped to a whisper, hoping you come back. I pressed my forehead against his, held it there, breathed with him, in, out, matching rhythms, the way our breathing had synchronized the first night I'd fallen asleep on his chest without knowing that I was falling into the rest of my life. I always find my way through, I whispered. Haven't you noticed? A sound. Low. Broken. The third laugh since I'd known him, surprised out of him at the worst possible moment and the best possible moment simultaneously. Because laughter and crying live in the same place, and sometimes they share the door. Ready? Elder Soren's voice. Gentle. The bonding master who'd witnessed more bonds than anyone alive, watching something he'd never seen. I looked at Kalen. He looked at me. Ready, I said. Soren placed his hands over ours, ancient fingers, warm despite their age. The Ashenmore bonding rite is not a ceremony of words, he said. It is a ceremony of presence. The mediator enters the wolf, meets what lives there, and chooses, with full knowledge, with nothing between her and the beast except her own will, whether to stay. He looked at me directly. If the wolf accepts you, the bond becomes permanent, unbreakable. Your wolves will be joined, not merged, not consumed, but intertwined, 2 threads in the same rope. Separate but inseparable. And if it doesn't accept me, then you will be expelled. The bond dissolves. He paused. The historical texts describe the consequences as severe. Severe like headache, severe, or severe like the last 3 women who got close to this wolf, severe? Margaret made a sound from her monitoring station that suggested she did not appreciate the humor. The wolf will not harm you, Soren said. You carry Ashenmore blood, but the experience of being inside a wolf that rejects you has been described as losing the part of yourself that believes you belong anywhere. I processed that. A fate worse than death. Not destruction, but permanent, bone-deep rejection. The certainty that you are fundamentally unwelcome in the one place you most wanted to be. Good thing I'm not planning on being rejected, I said with approximately 40% more confidence than I felt and 60% more than anyone in the room believed. Soren released our hands. Stepped back. Close your eyes, both of you. I closed my eyes. Brielle, reach for the bond, the thread that connects you. You felt it before, in your sleep, in proximity, on the battlefield when his heartbeat faltered and your power responded. Find that thread, follow it. I reached. Not with hands, with something deeper, the part of me that had recognized his heartbeat as home before I knew his name. The Ashenmore gift that wasn't a weapon or a trick but a key, designed to open doors that hierarchy keeps locked. I found the thread, warm, pulsing, leading from my chest to his, taut and humming like a string on an instrument played by two hands. I followed it and fell through. The wolf's interior was not what I expected. I'd braced for darkness, for rage, for 11 months of isolation condensed into a psychological landscape designed to break anyone who entered. What I found first was a room, the antechamber. A antechamber, reproduced in perfect detail inside the wolf's consciousness, the stone floor, the iron sconces, the heavy oak door to the inner chamber. Even the claw marks were there, scored into stone in the pacing patterns I'd memorized during my first weeks of cleaning. But the proportions were wrong, ceiling too high, walls too close. The dimensions of a space experienced by a creature that perceives the world differently than a human. The wolf's version of the room. The wolf's memory of the cage it built for itself. I walked through the antechamber. My feet made no sound. My body felt present but weightless. A visitor in someone else's architecture. The inner door was ahead. Heavy. Reinforced. Closed. Not 3 inches open. Fully closed. And from beyond it, sounds. Not breathing. Not the rhythmic resonance I'd learned to read. Screaming, not human screaming. Something deeper, more visceral. The sound of a wolf in agony, a keening, howling. Full body expression of pain that vibrated through the stone and through my bones and through the bond connecting me to the creature making the sound. I pushed the door open. Inside was the storm. Darkness, thick, pressurized, a darkness with weight and texture and temperature, hot, oppressive. The air itself charged with dominance energy, the raw, unfiltered pressure of an alpha wolf at full power, the force that had overwhelmed 3 women, shattered 2 minds, stopped 1 heart. I felt it hit me, not like a wall, like an ocean, rising, filling every space. The biological command that said kneel, submit, yield, break. My Ashenmore blood answered. The neutralization activated instinctively, the same mechanism that had let me sleep on his chest without submitting, the same gift that had confused every healer who'd observed it. The dominance pressure reached for me and found nothing to grip, like water closing around stone. I stood in the storm and I was not broken, but I felt it, the weight, the fury. The unimaginable pressure of existing inside a dominance field so powerful it had consumed its own host. This was what Kalen had lived inside for 11 months. This was the prison. Not the room, not the citadel. This constant, crushing, screaming pressure that the wolf generated simply by existing. No wonder the man had disappeared. Living inside this was like living inside a thunderclap that never ended. I walked forward. The storm shifted around me, not attacking, not retreating, but watching. The wolf was aware of me, tracking me through its own interior the way it had tracked me through a 3-inch gap on my first day. Evaluating, deciding, and as I walked deeper, the storm began showing me things, memories. Not mine, Kalen's. The wolf carried them like a river carries stones, tumbled, worn, but preserved. I saw a young man of 21 receiving news of his father's death. The hunting accident that wasn't an accident, the grief that the man processed and the wolf absorbed, converting sorrow into power because wolves burn pain as fuel. I saw the first years of the reign. Kalen learning to rule. The tactical genius, the strategic brilliance, The young king holding a fractured territory together while slowly, invisibly, the wolf inside him grew stronger. I saw the crack. Ellery, the third Luna candidate, 24 years old, brown hair, kind eyes. She'd volunteered because her family needed advancement, and she'd walked into Kalen's chamber with the genuine intention of helping. And the wolf had, I felt it, not an attack, a reaching. The wolf hadn't struck at Ellery. It had reached for her, the way it reached for everything, with full force, full dominance, the only volume it knew. It reached for Ellery the way a drowning man reaches for a rescuer, desperately with every ounce of strength. And the strength was too much, and the reaching was too powerful. And Ellery's wolf submitted so completely that her heart forgot to beat. The wolf's grief hit me like a physical blow. Not rage, not malice, grief. The devastating howling sorrow of a creature that had killed the thing it was trying to hold. The knowledge, felt at the cellular level, that its own nature was lethal to the things it wanted most. I killed her by wanting her to stay. The thought wasn't language. It was feeling, raw, enormous, pulsing through the storm like a heartbeat made of anguish. The wolf's foundational wound, the reason it consumed the man, not dominance but despair. If reaching for people destroyed them, then the wolf would stop reaching, would bury the man who wanted to reach, would become nothing but power and isolation, because isolation didn't kill anyone. For 11 months, the wolf had been grieving, not raging, not dominating, grieving. I stood in the storm with tears streaming down a face that might not have been physical, and I spoke, not with words, because words didn't exist here, but with the Ashenmore gift, the thing beneath language. It wasn't your fault. The reaching wasn't wrong. The reaching was the most human thing about you. You just didn't have anyone who could hold what you are without breaking. The storm shifted, contracted, grew quiet, not calm, but listening. The way the antechamber door had been opened 3 inches that first morning. Not an invitation. A question. Who are you? I'm the woman who walked through your gap, who brought bread from her own rations, who talked about furniture while you paced behind a door. Why didn't you break? Because I'm the thing the old king died to protect, the counterpart your bloodline has been waiting for, the hand that can hold yours without shattering. Prove it. The storm surged, full force. The complete, unrestrained dominance of the most powerful wolf on the continent, everything it had, everything it was, directed at me with the desperate, terrified hope of a creature testing whether the one thing it wants most will survive the test. My blood absorbed it, neutralized it, equalized it, not fighting, receiving, the way a river receives rain. The storm screamed and I stood inside it, and I was not broken, and I was not broken. And I was not broken. And the wolf understood. The storm collapsed. Not violently, like an exhale, like a fist unclenching, like 11 months of held breath finally releasing. The darkness dissolved. And behind it, behind the storm, behind the grief, behind the memories, behind everything the wolf had built to protect itself from the world and the world from itself, a door. Heavy oak, reinforced with iron bands, open 3 inches. I'd know this door anywhere. I'd cleaned the room in front of it for 17 days. I'd topped through it, brought food to it, reached through it. I'd measured my entire relationship in the distance between its edge and its frame. The gap, inside the wolf, 3 inches. The same question it had always asked. Will you come back? I pushed. 3 inches to 7, 7 to 12. I pushed harder. The door resisted, the way the physical door had resisted on that first morning when I decided to walk into a predator's room, because stubbornness had always been my most pronounced personality. Trait and fear had never successfully overridden it. The door opened fully, and beyond it, sunlight, a room, simple, warm, not destroyed, not wrecked. The version of the chamber that existed in the wolf's deepest wish, The room as it would be if the beast were calm and the man were free and someone had walked through the door and stayed. The table in the center, unbroken, no scars, no clamps, no repair lines, the table as it would have been if nothing had ever shattered it, whole, smooth, perfect, a meal on its surface, bread, dried fruit, honeycomb, arranged on a cloth in the pattern I used when I left his food by the gap, a wildflower in a water glass. And sitting at the table, hands folded, watching the door with the patient intensity of a man who has been waiting for a very long time and has never once considered giving up. Kalen, not the wolf, not the beast, not the fractured, recovering, word-rationing alpha I'd been rebuilding with bread rolls and table halves and 5 days of sitting outside a gap. The man. Fully. Completely. The version of himself that had existed for 3 heartbeats when I kissed him. Amber eyes, warm expression, the faintest hint of a smile. He'd been here the whole time. Inside the wolf. Behind the storm and the grief and the door. Sitting at a table that had never been broken, in a room that had never been wrecked, waiting for someone to find him. 11 months. Waiting 11 months. There you are, he said, my words, given back to me, from the mouth of the man I'd been reaching for since I first pushed open a door 3 inches ajar and found a wolf sitting on a stone floor. I walked to the table, sat across from him, picked up the bread. The honeycomb is a nice touch, I said. He laughed. Not the broken, surprised laugh from the physical world, a full laugh, free, unguarded. The sound of a man who, inside his own deepest self, had nothing left to hold back. You came back, he said. I always find my way through, every time. His eyes held mine, amber, purely amber, the gold entirely absent, every door, every gap, every morning. Then you know I'm not leaving. I know. He stood, walked around the table. Stood in front of me, close, warm, present in a way I'd never felt from him in the physical world. Because out there, the wolf was always between us. And here, behind all its defenses, there was nothing between us at all. The bond, he said, if you stay here, if you accept what's behind this door, it's permanent. The wolf and I become whole. And you become part of that. Not consumed, not controlled. Woven in, like 2 threads in the same rope, separate but inseparable. He touched my face. His hand was steady, no tremor. Inside the wolf, inside this room, the man's hands didn't shake because the man wasn't fighting anything. He was home. Is that what you want? I fell asleep on a stranger's chest and woke up to 40 wolves staring at me. I talked about candelabras during your death fight. I walked onto a battlefield and silenced 300 wolves. I carried half a broken table to a carpenter and paid him in bread rolls. I took his hand from my face, held it, pressed it against my heart. Yes, this is what I want. You are what I want. The wolf, the man, the fragments, the silence, the socks, the wildflower. And this table that never broke in here because this is the place where you kept the version of us that was always possible. He kissed me, not the tentative 3-second terrified kiss from the chamber above. This was the kiss that existed on the other side of fear, the one that happens when 2 people have walked through every door between them and found that the last room has no walls. His arms came around me and mine around him, and his mouth was warm and certain and tasted like honeycomb and homecoming and every morning I'd ever spent talking to him through a gap. I could have stayed forever in that sunlit room, but the bond was calling, the thread between us humming, tightening, weaving itself into something permanent. I could feel the wolf around us settling, feel the 11 months of grief dissolving like ice in spring water. The beast wasn't dying, it was resting. Finally, truly resting. Because the woman it had been waiting for was here, and she wasn't breaking, and she wasn't leaving, and the reaching, the desperate, destructive reaching that had killed Ellery and broken 2 others, had finally found hands strong enough to hold it. The room began to brighten, edges softening, the sunlight intensifying beyond what any physical sun could produce. "Time to go back," Kylan said. "Together?" "Together." He took my hand. I took his. The light swallowed us. I opened my eyes, the bonding chamber. Stone walls, torchlight. Witnesses standing exactly where they'd been. Rorik at the east wall, Tynan at the west. Tessa clutching socks like a talisman, my father's hand pressed flat against stone, Dagna's arms crossed. Margaret's eyes locked on her instruments. Kaelin's eyes opened at the same instant, synchronized. His eyes were amber. Not amber with gold edges, not the balance I'd grown accustomed to. Pure amber. Warm and clear and entirely, completely human. The wolf was still there. I could feel it through the bond, which was now a permanent humming presence in my chest, like a second heartbeat. The beast existed, would always exist, but it was no longer drowning the man. It was behind the door at peace, because the woman it had been waiting for had finally walked through and chosen to stay. Margaret spoke first. "His readings," she said. Her voice had abandoned professionalism entirely. "The wolf signature has integrated completely. I've never, in 30 years, the dominance pressure is regulated, equalized, as though the wolf has a counterbalance. That would be me," I said. "That would be you." She set down her instruments with the careful precision of a scientist, accepting that some phenomena exceed the capacity of her field. "You're bonded, permanently." And his heart rate. She checked again, checked a third time. "Your heart rates are synchronized, both of you, beating at the same rate, the same rhythm, as though they're the same heart," Tessa said from behind her socks. Because Tessa always said what the scientists couldn't. Her eyes were streaming, her nose was red, and she was holding those socks like they were the only structural support keeping her upright. "Yes," Margaret whispered. "As though they're the same heart." Soren stepped forward. Ancient hands, ancient voice, ancient certainty. The bond is recognized. The mediator has entered the wolf and returned. The alpha is whole. What was broken is healed. What was separate is joined. He placed his hands over ours. "Let it be known, the last Ashenmoor and the Raven Crest Alpha are bonded. From this moment until death releases them, and if the old stories are true, the faintest smile." Not even then. The formal ceremony happened in the great hall, the same room where I'd scrubbed floors on my hands and knees, the same room where Lady Vena had called me a field mouse, the same room where Lord Cavil had called me a whore and Callan had broken his jaw with one word. 300 wolves. The same gallery that had watched me sit in a wooden chair and be interrogated. The same hall that had heard "mine. She is mine," pushed through a throat silent for 11 months. I stood at the center of that floor, not in a wooden chair, not on my knees with a scrub brush, standing, in blue, beside the Alpha King, same hall, different woman. Or maybe the same woman just finally allowed to stand up. Soren performed the formal rites. Ancient words, the pack witnessing, the continental declaration that would reshape the political landscape of every territory on the map. Then came the vows. Kaelin went first. He turned to me, held both my hands, and spoke, clearly, fully, the words coming with effort but without the fragmentation that had defined his recovery. Inside the wolf, the storm had broken. The man's voice was still healing, would always carry the marks of 11 months of silence, but the words flowed. Chosen, earned. Precious because they were expensive and he was spending them on the one thing that justified the cost. "I give you the gap in the door," he said. "Every inch of it. The 3 that started as a question and the 12 that became an answer. I give you the bread you brought me when I couldn't feed myself. Your bread from your own plate, given by a woman who was hungry and chose to feed me first." His voice roughened. He held steady. I give you the morning you walked through the door and told me my furniture was destroyed, including the observation that the mattress looked like it insulted my mother. I give you the candelabra in the wall and the clumsy table repair and the fact that you made me laugh when I'd forgotten laughter existed. I was crying. My face had abandoned all structural integrity. My nose staged a complete rebellion. 300 wolves witnessed the Luna of the Ravencrest Dominion lose a comprehensive fight with her own tear ducts, and not one of them looked away. I give you the wildflower, the one I found growing to stone because it reminded me of you, something that survived where nothing should survive and was beautiful because of it, not despite it. He lifted our joined hands, pressed them against his chest, and I give you this. The heartbeat that was erratic and broken and wrong for 11 months until a maid fell asleep on my chest and it remembered what steady felt like. He paused, drew a breath that shook. You are my steady, Brielle. You are the reason the door is open and the table holds and the wolf is quiet, not because of your blood, because of your stubbornness and your bread rolls and the fact that you never, not once, answered the gap with no. He pressed his forehead against mine. Keep coming back, that's all I ask. Just keep coming back. I needed a moment, several moments, an entire collection of moments during which I proved conclusively that dignified crying is a skill I do not possess and never will. Then I spoke. I could give you the traditional words, I said. The ancient promises. The formal declarations that Luna candidates have been reciting for centuries in halls like this one. I looked at him. But we've never been traditional. Our love story started with a door gap and a scrub brush. It was built on furniture repair and wool socks and a woman talking about candelabras during a death fight. So I'm going to make you a promise in our language, the one nobody else speaks. I squeezed his hands. I promise to bring you breakfast every morning, even when the bread is stale and the cheese is questionable and the honeycomb supply chain is under threat from kitchen politics. I promise to talk to you through every door you close and to wait on the other side of every gap, no matter how narrow, for as long as it takes you to open it. Laughter in the gallery. Tears in the gallery, both at once. I promise that when the wolf is loud and the man is quiet, I will sit on the floor outside your door and discuss antechamber decor until you remember that the world contains someone who finds your interior decorating both structurally concerning and deeply endearing. Kaylin made a sound, half laugh, half sob. I promise to fix the table. Every time, however many times it breaks. Because the carpenter told me wood has a limit, but I don't believe him about us. We don't have a limit. We have scars. And scars are just proof that we chose repair over replacement. I lifted his hand, pressed it against my heart, his heartbeat under my palm, mine under his, the same rhythm, the same rate. 2 instruments playing the same note. And I promise you this, the thing I've never said, because our language is objects and silence, and I was afraid that words would reduce it to something ordinary. I looked at him, those amber eyes. The man I'd found behind every door. I love you, not because my blood calms your wolf, not because a king built a cradle for me before I was born, not because our father's pact wrote this story before we lived it. I love you because you left me socks when your world was collapsing, because you found wild flowers in impossible places, because you asked me if they fit, when you could barely speak and the answer mattered more to you than the kingdom. My voice dropped to a whisper that somehow reached every corner of that domed ceiling. I love the man behind the wolf. I love the wolf behind the man. I love the table and the scars and the gap and every single inch of the distance we crossed to get here. I love you, Kaylin Voss. And I will keep coming back until the doors stop existing and there's nothing left between us but morning light, silence. Then, from the gallery, a sound, a wolf. Then another, dozens, hundreds, not howling, not the aggressive, dominance-driven chorus wolves use for territorial claims. Something softer, something I'd never heard, a collective sound of recognition, The pack acknowledging the bond, accepting the Luna, welcoming the Ashenmoor into the Ravencrest bloodline with a song that had no words because it predated language. 300 wolves singing for a maid who'd started on the floor with a scrub brush. Kaelin kissed me. In front of all of them, not tentative, not terrified. The kiss of a man who knew exactly what he wanted and had spent 4 parts of a story learning how to reach for it without breaking it. I kissed him back, with everything. The Great Hall erupted. The week that followed was resolution dressed as ordinary life. Varen's remaining forces, fractured by the battlefield silence, further weakened by news that the Ashenmoor had permanently bonded with the strongest alpha on the continent, surrendered without engagement. Varen himself was captured attempting to cross into southern territory disguised as a merchant, his military bearing apparently difficult to conceal when you've been radiating it for 30 years. His trial would come later. The 30-year hunt was over. The Continental Coalition that had sanctioned the purge formally dissolved. Not dramatically, bureaucratically. Documents signed. Agreements revoked. The quiet dismantling of a political structure built on the elimination of a people that had, against all probability, survived. Not all packs were happy. Some feared the Ashenmoor power. Some resented the change. The world wasn't perfect, but the immediate threat was resolved and the remaining opposition was political rather than military, which meant it could be addressed with diplomacy rather than silence. Some doors close because they should. Others stay open because they've waited long enough. I visited Morn one last time. The detention wing. The iron table bolted to the floor. The man who'd orchestrated my arrival, my placement, my access, the architect of a plan that had accidentally produced a love story instead of a leash. The bond is complete, I said. I heard. He sat with the composure of a man who'd accepted his circumstances without accepting his defeat. The pact your mother's protector died for, fulfilled. Not the way you planned. No, I planned control. You produced something else. Love. If you like. He folded his hands. I put you in his path, controlled the method. But the result was never mine. A pause, genuine contemplation rather than calculation. It was always yours. Was it worth it? The cell? The fall? Ask me in 10 years. When the Dominion is thriving and the bloodline is restored. If the answer is yes, I'd like a better cell. I left him there. With his ledgers and his calculations and the knowledge that the most significant thing he'd ever done was an accident he couldn't take credit for. I found Rorik in the West Wing corridor, his post, the place he'd stood for 6 years guarding an alpha who'd been lost inside a wolf. Luna, the title was new from him. It carried weight. I wanted to thank you for the authorizations, for standing beside me in the council, for every corridor you walked me through, and every time you looked at me like I was insane but let me proceed anyway. You were insane. You walked into an alpha's chamber on your first day. The door was open. 3 inches is not open. 3 inches is an invitation. You know that now. The faintest crack in the boulder, the smallest softening around his eyes. He's speaking? Rorik said quietly. Full sentences sometimes. He told me. He stopped. The crack widened. The emotion he'd been containing for 6 years pressed against the stone. He told me he saw the 6 years, what I held, while he couldn't. And he said he couldn't have come back without knowing someone was keeping the lights on. Rurik's voice roughened, the boulder crumbling. 6 years. I thought he didn't know. He knew. I put my hand on his arm. Even inside the wolf, he knew. Rorik covered my hand with his massive palm. One moment, then he straightened, rebuilt the boulder, and resumed his post. Some men show love through presence. Through standing in corridors for 6 years without being asked and without complaining and without ever once leaving. The world doesn't write songs about those men, but it should. Tynan returned from the border on the 7th day. Luna, he said it with warmth. The cousin who'd fought for this position and found something better in the losing. I hear you captured Varen. He was disguised as a grain merchant, poorly. His military bearing is difficult to conceal when you've been radiating command authority for 3 decades. Thank you for holding the citadel, for everything. He studied me with the expression I remembered from the challenge arena. Assessment without hostility. You're still insane, he said. I've been told. The continent is grateful. He paused. I'm glad I yielded, not because I lost, because I got to watch what winning actually looks like. What does winning look like? Like a woman sitting on the ground during a death fight talking about furniture. That's the bravest thing I've ever witnessed. And I've led border campaigns. Tessa found me in the kitchen. Because of course she did. The kitchen was where we'd started. 2 women sharing gossip about the Alpha King while folding linens. So, she said, Luna. Apparently, fancy title. Does it come with better food? Marginally. The honeycomb supply has stabilized. Finally, my negotiations with the South Kitchen have been brutal. She sat across from me. Same position as our first conversation, 3 years into her service and 2 days into mine. I have something to tell you. Okay, Keelan asked me to take a position, head of the Luna's household. She paused. I said yes, obviously, but I wanted to tell you directly because you're my friend first, and my Luna second, and I don't want titles changing the order. Nothing changes the order. Ever. Good. Because I have opinions about household management that are going to be controversial. The bread situation alone? Tessa. She stopped. Thank you, I said. For the socks. For the tunnels. For every piece of intelligence you smuggled and every time you showed up at a door I didn't know I needed you behind. That's what friends do. That's what best friends do. And you've been doing it since day 2, when you decided I look like someone who needed a friend more than a bath. And barely more than a bath. She grinned. I stand by that assessment. I hugged her. She hugged back. And the friendship that had been tested by counsels and confessions and a march through burned villages and a battlefield and a wolf held exactly the way it always had. That evening, I found my father in the cradle room, sitting beside the cradle, touching the wood, the position I'd found him in every day since he'd arrived. I sat beside him. Didn't speak. After a long time, he said, She never told me. I know. About the king, the pact, what she was. His hand rested on the cradle's edge. She let me think she was a woman from the north who needed quiet, and I gave her that, and she died in it. She was protecting us. She was protecting you. He looked at me. I'm the one who sold you for a tax debt. If I'd known, if you'd known, you wouldn't have sold me, and I wouldn't have come here, and I wouldn't have walked through a door 3 inches open. And a man who'd been silent for 11 months would still be sitting in a wrecked room with no one to bring him bread. He processed that. You're saying I accidentally did the right thing. I'm saying the road here was terrible and I wouldn't change a single step, because every step led to that door. And behind it was the rest of my life. He put his arm around me. I leaned into him, and we sat beside the cradle his wife had never told him about, in a room built by a king he'd never met, in the citadel where his daughter had found a home she was always meant to have. Some circles take 30 years to close. They close. The next morning, the 8th day, I woke to sunlight. The West Wing chamber. Our chamber. Permanently ours. Not a king's quarters occupied by a maid, but a home built by 2 people who'd learned to share space the way they'd learned to share everything else. Carefully, with attention. With the understanding that small gestures carry more weight than grand ones. His boots beside the door. My boots beside his. The left one finally repaired. Our coats on adjacent hooks. The herbal guide from Dunhalla beside his military maps on the desk. 2 lives overlapping, 2 histories intertwined, the table in the center, twice broken, twice repaired. 2 scars visible, one rough, from candelabra clamps fashioned by a man who couldn't speak, One smoothed from a carpenter's professional work, paid for in bread rolls by a woman who couldn't stop fixing things. The scars would never disappear. They were part of the table now, part of its story. A table that has never been tested is just furniture. A table that has broken and been repaired is a promise. On its surface, breakfast, honeycomb, bread from the South Kitchen. Tessa's supply chain reforms already in effect. 2 cups, and a wildflower in a water glass. But this morning, something was different. I looked at the window, the shutters permanently open, letting in the eastern light. And there, on the stone ledge outside the glass, growing from a crack in the ancient granite, a wildflower. Not picked, not pressed between journal pages, not brought from somewhere impossible by hands that wanted to give beauty. Growing, a living wildflower, roots and stone, petals toward the sun, surviving where nothing should survive, blooming where no one planted it, existing because life doesn't ask permission from the conditions that say it shouldn't. Just like us. Kaylam was beside me, still in bed, his arm around my waist, the same hold from the first night I'd fallen asleep on his chest, except lighter now. The hold of a man who was no longer afraid that the thing he was reaching for would disappear. "Good morning," I said. "Morning," his voice rough with sleep. "Easy, unguarded, honeycomb." "Obviously." Tessa delivered it at dawn. She threatened someone. I'm choosing not to investigate. The smile, the real one, not the almost smile. The genuine article, warm, undefended, the expression of a man who has found the thing he was looking for and isn't letting go. "The wildflower," I said, nodding toward the window. "On the ledge. Did you—" No, he followed my gaze, saw it. It grew on its own. We looked at the flower. Small, purple, impossible, growing from stone the way everything between us had grown from impossible conditions. "Of course it did," I said. "We ate breakfast at the table, together, in sunlight." The door to the antechamber stood open, fully open, the way it would stay. No gap, no question, just an open door, and the light coming through, and 2 people on the same side of it for the first time in a story that had been about doors since the very beginning. The night I fell asleep on the Alpha King's chest, I didn't know I was falling into the rest of my life. I didn't know that home was a heartbeat, or a gap in a door, or a pair of wool socks left by a man who couldn't speak but refused to let me be cold. I didn't know that love was breakfast at a broken table, or a wildflower growing through stone, or the sound of a man laughing for the first time in a year because a woman made a joke about his furniture. I know now. The door is open. It's always open now, and the table holds. This is the end of Brielle and Kaylin's story. 4 parts, 4 doors. 1 gap that started at 3 inches and ended with no distance at all. If this story leaves you with anything, let it be this: that the right person doesn't make love easy. The right person makes love worth every difficult, stubborn, table-breaking inch of the journey. That patience isn't weakness. Patience is a woman sitting outside a closed door every morning, bringing breakfast, talking about furniture, waiting, because she knows that some doors open from the inside, and all she can do is keep showing up until they do. That the bravest thing you'll ever do isn't fighting an army, or silencing a battlefield, or walking into a wolf. The bravest thing you'll ever do is reach through a 3-inch gap in the dark and trust that someone will reach back. That inside every wolf, inside every person who has been told they are too much, too dangerous, too broken to be loved, there is a door, and behind that door, someone is sitting at a table, waiting, hoping, keeping the room warm for whoever is brave enough to push through, and that broken things deserve the effort of repair. Not because the scars disappear, they don't. Because the scars are proof. Proof that someone looked at the damage and said, "This is worth fixing. You are worth fixing. We are worth fixing." If you're standing outside a door right now, waiting, hoping, reaching through whatever gap exists between you and the thing you love most, keep reaching. The door opens. It always opens. You just have to keep showing up. Thank you for walking through every door with Brielle and Kaylin. This story started with a maid who fell asleep on a stranger's chest. It ended with a wildflower growing on a window ledge, two heartbeats synchronized into one, and a table that held. If it found you at the right time, if it reached through whatever gap you're standing beside and touched something real, then it did what stories are meant to do. Destined Hertz has more stories coming. More doors, more gaps, more wildflowers growing through impossible stone. Subscribe, hit the bell, share this with someone who needs to hear that love is worth the breaking. Because we're just getting started. The gap was always a question. Now you know the answer. The door is open. It's always open now, and the table holds. Goodbye for now. See you in the next story.